Hello and welcome to Socialism, the Marxist podcast of the Socialist Party. Hit subscribe today to never miss an episode. I'm Oscar, a Socialist Party member, and in today's podcast, I'll be discussing the German election results from February 2025 with Sascha Stanicic, the General Secretary of the Socialist Organization Solidarity, or SOL, the section of the Committee for a Workers' International in Germany. So in these elections, the left party in Germany, Die Linke, achieved almost 9% of the national vote, performing particularly well with 25% of the vote amongst 18 to 24-year-olds and 21% of the vote in Berlin. On the other hand, the right-wing Alternative for Germany, AfD, achieved 20% of the national vote. So what do these results represent? Hi Sascha, thanks for joining me today.
Hi Oscar, thanks for the invitation.
So your recent article describes the German elections that took place in February 2025 as a slap in the face to the establishment parties. Could you elaborate on that?
Yes, first of all, it has to be noted that this election was an early election. It was called after the government, which was a coalition of three parties, the Social Democrats, the Greens, and the Liberal Party, failed, mainly on differences between the parties on how to proceed in regard to economic policy and in regard to the daily growing demands by the capitalist class for attacks on the working class. So one major point of difference is what is called the debt brake in Germany, which is a constitutional ruling which prohibits the government to take on new credit. After the government failed, new elections were called. And really what happened was that it was a continuation of almost all the elections which took place worldwide in 2024, because there was like one general phenomena, which was who governs loses. And that was the case. The Social Democratic Party received its worst result in history. The Liberals, who were at around 11-12% before, fell under the 5% barrier and are not in parliament anymore. And also the Green Party went down from 14.7% to 11.6%. So all the governing parties lost. The conservative CDU, Christian Democratic Union, won the elections, and they increased votes in comparison to the previous elections. But historically, their 28.6% are the second worst result in the history of post-war Germany. So in reality, what we have seen is, as you quoted my article, a slap in the face for all the established parties. And the only parties which grew in votes were both to the left and to the right, parties which are largely not seen to be part of the pro-capitalist establishment, which is on the right, the Alternative for Germany, a right-wing populist party with a certain fascistic elements within it. To the Left Party, which made a comeback. They increased their votes from 4.9% to 8.8%. And then there's a party which is called Alliance Sahra Wagenknecht, which is a splitter from the Left Party, but a split to the right, which received 4.9%. So they didn't make it into parliament, but they were one of the parties which gained in votes.
So what are the prospects after this election for a small grand coalition between the Christian Democrats, the CDU, and the Social Democrats, the SPD?
Well, I would say that obviously you have to see the background to what the new government will face, because the result of the elections is a reflection of the general situation capitalism is in, both in Germany but also worldwide, which is a situation of, how we call it, multiple crises, economically, politically, socially, environmentally. So it will be a crisis government. Economically, Germany is in its third year of recession. And we do have a situation where for the last 1 or 2 years, we see a very high number of job losses, partially also factory closures, but hundreds of thousands of industrial jobs in the car industry, but also in other parts of industry have been slashed. And really, Germany, if you like, from the one point of view, it is the strongest economy in the European Union, but it is also, as it is called, the sick man of Europe, in the sense that the growth rate in Germany is the weakest in the EU, and therefore the capitalists are calling for reforms, in inverted commas, in their interest. That means they want to improve, from their point of view, the conditions to make profits. But as we know, if profits go up, the share of the wealth for the working class in terms of wages or social security has to go down. So we expect this government to be a government of crisis, a government of attacks on the working class, but it is also a government of militarization, because given the international background, with the increasing crisis, conflicts, competitions between capitalist imperialist forces, also given the policy of the Trump administration, we in the recent weeks see a massive increase, another massive increase in militarization and armament. The old government, after the start of the Ukraine war, had already voted on a special, as they call it, special investment for the German army, the Bundeswehr, of 100 billion euros. Just recently, they have agreed on another reform in regard to unlimitedly getting into a position of unlimitedly arming the German army, because what they did is that they lifted the debt brake just for expenditure on armaments. So what we will have is as I said, a government of crisis, of class struggle from above against the working class, and of militarization.
So what does the result for the right-wing populist Alternative for Germany, AfD, represent?
Well, what we see is a situation of polarization in society. Given that the economic and social crisis is hitting the working class and also the middle classes. We've seen loss in real wages over the last couple of years. And generally a feeling amongst a wide part of the population of insecurity, of fear, and also big alienation of the existing institutions, the political parties, the government, parliament, the existing pro-capitalist institutions. Now, what happened over a period of years is that, in my view, partially because of campaigns against migration, against migrants, racist campaigns by the established bourgeois parties, by the capitalist state and government, by the capitalist media, that they tried to scapegoat immigrants for social problems, which is always an attempt by the ruling classes to divide the working class along national lines, but also to divert attention away from their own responsibility for the social and economic problems which exist. So this happened over years, and the right-wing populists could make use of that with their racism, with their scapegoating of immigrants, at the same time presenting themselves as anti-establishment and as a force for the ordinary people. So in this situation, they were in a position to gain ground electorally. It's mainly an electoral phenomenon. The Alternative for Germany now has 50,000 members. If you look, the Left Party has 100,000 members. The Alternative for Germany has 20% in the election. The Left Party had a bit under 9% in the election. So the right-wing populists are more of an electoral phenomena, and it is an expression of the crisis of the capitalist system. It's an expression of the, if you like, political confusion, a lack of orientation, but mainly also a lack of a strong working class left-wing alternative. In our view, the right-wing populists could only gain like they did because of the complete failure, betrayal of the social democracy over the last decades, who turned from a reformist, social democratic workers' parties with pro-capitalist leaderships, but who were still in one way or the other expressing political demands of the working class. They turned completely into capitalist formations, neoliberal formations. And they left a gap. The trade union leaderships are still connected to the social democracy, and they do not fight the struggles which would be needed to be fought to represent the interests of the working class. And especially they do not lead a political fight against the governments or against capitalism as a system. And then you have the Left Party, which maybe we can elaborate in a minute, but which also failed over the last years to represent a genuine anti-establishment alternative. This gave the space for right-wing populists in Germany, the Alternative for Germany, to fill that vacuum, which they have done. It does reflect a shift, if you like, a shift to the right in official politics. In our view, it does not necessarily reflect a shift to the right in society in general. Rather, what we see is, as I said, a polarization.
So before we go into the left party, Die Linke, I just want to quickly touch on Sahra Wagenknecht, who was a former leading member of the left party. She split from them in January 2024 and formed her own party, the Sahra Wagenknecht Alliance, or BSW. What happened to them in this election? Because on the eve of the election, people thought they might do quite well, but they didn't.
This is an interesting but also very contradictory phenomena. And it's also hard to grasp, because Sahra Wagenknecht was not only a leader in the Left Party, but for many years she was seen as a representative of the left wing of the party. And many of the, for example, members of parliament who went with her to form the BSW in the past would have been on the left wing of the party. We would have cooperated with them in many questions. And what happened is that, in a way, in a mixture of left-wing positions when it comes to certain economic questions, but right-wing positions when it comes to certain social questions, Wagenknecht overall moved to the right, completely abandoned any reference to socialism. She stands clearly for a market economy with certain state interventions, but she has completely abandoned any idea of a socialist change of society. So what she really, in terms of the economic side, is arguing is a going back to a period of capitalism, which in Germany was called the social market economy, where on the surface you had a situation where the competing interests of the capitalists and the working class, were compromised, and everyone profited from it. That was never the case. I mean, and capitalism never overcame the competing interests between capitalists and workers. But in the post-war period, given the economic upswing, there was more room for the capitalists to grant certain reforms in terms of wages, social security systems. But that is long gone. And it is an illusion that in the present period of capitalist crisis and decline, this could come back. So that is the economic side. On the social side, Sahra Wagenknecht and her supporters have developed a very bad way of criticizing identity politics, in the sense that we would also agree that identity politics can play a bad role in increasing the divisions which exist in the working class. But we would always argue that that doesn't mean that the left should stop fighting discrimination, whether it is against women, LGBTQ plus people, or migrants. But really, Sahra Wagenknecht and her supporters have turned their back on these struggles and are, to a certain extent, reflecting the culture wars the populist right wages against democratic rights for minorities. But the worst thing is really that they have shifted very much to the right when it comes to the issue of migration, actually being to the right of the Social Democracy and even the Conservative Party in some cases. So when they were formed a year or so ago, and in the elections last year, which was the European election and 3 federal state elections in the east of Germany, they made an electoral breakthrough. But what they then did is actually vindicating what we have criticized. We said that they posture as an anti-establishment force, but that in reality they do not represent an alternative to the establishment parties. So what happened in the east of Germany, they immediately joined 2 federal state governments. In the federal state of Brandenburg, where they now govern with the Social Democracy, and in the federal state of Thuringia, where they now govern in a coalition together, not only with the Social Democracy, but also with the Conservatives. So many people have seen that they are not actually an anti-establishment force, but that they are also after government positions. I think one factor is the BSW does have a more principled stance or position on the wars. It is clearly against arms exports to Ukraine. It is clearly against the war of Israel against the Palestinians. Now, the official position of the Left Party is not much different. But within the Left Party, there are forces who are actually supporting arms deliveries to the Ukrainian government. And there are also forces within the Left Party who are in support of the state of Israel in a general sense. And the BSW could attract a layer of people for whom the question of the wars was the main issue, and they saw in the BSW the main or the most principled force against the war. But this was not the decisive issue when it came to the general elections in February. So I think these were the factors why the BSW did not make it into parliament. At the same time, we have to say they did not enter parliament because of an undemocratic legislation. We think that the 5% barrier, which stops parties who are under 5% from getting into parliament, is a very undemocratic thing, and we do not support it. In that sense, I would say that the BSW, I mean, we're not unhappy that it didn't make it into parliament, but we would defend any demand to scrap the 5% barrier. And it is open how that party will develop in the future.
So the left party, Die Linke, got their best result in a number of years. What do you think led to that?
Well, we call it the dialectics of an existential crisis. Because what we have seen is a very impressive comeback of the left party. But the background is that it was in a deep crisis. It didn't get the 5% in the 2021 elections. Then, because of a special regulation, if you win 3 constituencies, you get into parliament on the basis of the overall vote you received. So they had a group in parliament because of that. But they had already gone under the 5%. Since then, they lost members. They had one electoral defeat after the other. I think they ended up under 3% in the European elections in one of the East German federal states where they used to be part of government. And in the past, they would have over 20%. They fell out of parliament because they didn't make the 5%. That was in September. So it was in a big crisis. Now, many say the main reason for that crisis was the debates and struggles and controversies which were going on with Sahra Wagenknecht over some years. And that was a factor. But we think that the main reason for the crisis in which the party ended up was that it had developed a policy of accommodation politically, programmatically, to the Social Democrats and the Greens, that it entered federal state governments in coalitions with the Social Democracy and the Greens, which led the party to execute ordinary pro-capitalist politics. And this led to a situation where many people saw them as part of the establishment, as the left part of the establishment, but not as a real alternative. Now, with the new elections, which were called then in late autumn, it became clear that it is possible that the left party would be kicked out of parliament, and that if that happens, maybe the left party would completely disappear. And I think then there was a counter-reaction. There was a counter-reaction of young people, of a layer of worker activists, of trade union activists who said, we need a party to the left of social democracy. We need a party which stands for a principled criticism of capitalism, a party which in its program stands for socialism, which is speaking out against the attacks against war. So this was the counter-reaction which developed. And then what happened was that for the first time in history, or in recent history of Germany, the conservatives put forward a resolution into the parliament, into the Bundestag, and voted that resolution together with the MPs of the right-wing populist Alternative for Germany. So for the first time, it became clear to millions that what the conservatives and all the bourgeois parties had said before, that there's a firewall against cooperating with the right-wing populists, that this was not the case anymore. And there was huge anger about that. I mean, there were mass demonstrations of hundreds of thousands of people, but there was huge anger against the CDU leadership, but then also against the leadership of the SPD and the Greens, who didn't participate in that vote, but they immediately made clear that for them, this does not mean that they would not be prepared anymore to go into a coalition with the conservatives. And in that situation, the left party stood out as the only party which maintained certain principles when it comes to the rights of migrants, when it comes to opposition to the right-wing populists. But also, they did organize an election campaign in which they successfully made clear that they stand for important social and economic demands in the interests of the working class. So they managed to stand out with a clear left-wing and social profile. And I think that was the main background for the electoral success. But it's not just an electoral success. Since the end of 2023, the membership of the party has doubled from 50,000 to 100,000 now. So there's an influx, especially of young people, into the party who want to fight the populist right, but who also want to fight for their economic and social interests against, attacks on the working class, against attacks on democratic rights. Now, the contradictory thing about Die Linke still is that in two federal states, it still is part of the federal state government. In these federal states, it continues the same pro-capitalist politics as they did in the past in state governments. And that means that, for example, in the federal state of Bremen, they are co-responsible for a cuts budget, and that in the recent vote in the German upper house, so you have the Bundestag, which is the main parliament, but legislations which also have a meaning for the federal states have to be passed in the second chamber of parliament, the upper house, which is representatives of the federal state government. And there, the left party representatives voted with the conservatives and the social democrats and the Greens, even for the arms program and the measures which they have now put through, which is lifting the debt brake in order to be able to have unlimited armaments expenditure, and then an infrastructure program which is limited and where it is open what exactly will be the effect of it for working class people.
So how can the electoral gains and the new members in Die Linke be used to help advance the workers' movement? And what will your organisation, Socialist Organisation Solidarity, or SOL, be doing in the coming weeks?
Well, we stand for the creation of a broad workers' party with a socialist program. That's one reason why we have been part of the left party of Die Linke, and why we have always, called for a vote for the party, because we we've seen it as a starting point for the creation of a broad socialist party, a broad party for the working class. But we do think that it is necessary for the party to actually adopt a clear anti-capitalist and socialist program, to adopt a policy and a strategy which is not focusing on parliamentary work, but on the class struggle, on work in the trade unions, in the neighborhoods, which sees the parliament as a means to support class struggles and movements, as a place where you can make propaganda against capitalism, but not as the main focus of party work. And we think that the policy of participating in pro-capitalist governments as junior partners with the Social Democrats or with the Green Party has to be stopped, and that the party has to focus on a socialist program and then on organizing working class people and young people to fight back. So we are participating in the Left Party to put forward such ideas and such demands, while at the same time playing a part in organizing branches and in reaching out to working class people, trying to make the party an instrument, especially when it comes to strikes of working class people or other movements.
So what are the perspectives for the trade unions and public sector strikes?
What we have seen is that as in the UK and a number of other countries, the cost of living crisis over the last couple of years had led to an increase in strike activities because workers want their share and they do not want to accept further losses in real wages. So we did have a bigger strike movements, especially in 2023, to a limited extent in 2024, which in the context of the way the trade unions and collective bargaining is organized in Germany, in most cases had the character of what we here call warning strikes, which are limited strikes of 1 or 2 days in the process of collective bargaining negotiations. And in most cases, then compromises were agreed to by the trade union leaderships, and ballots or indefinite strikes, ballots for indefinite strikes were not organized. At the moment, and these compromises, in our view, were bad. In most cases, they even led to further losses in real wages. Certainly, they did not make up the losses in real wages which had happened over the last few years. Now, at the moment, we are in the middle of a collective bargaining round in the public sector, as you mentioned, and we have seen a number of important warning strikes. There are also some other strike movements. For example, just today, the Berlin public transport workers are on strike. They demand an increase in their wages of 750 euros per month because they are the worst paid public transport sector workers in the whole country. And they had to go through a lot of wage losses over the last decade. Unfortunately, we do not have a situation where within the trade unions there are strong, organized left-wing or oppositionist currents who could put the leaderships under strong pressure to go further than they want to go. So in most cases, as I said before, the situation is that during the warning strikes, the anger and dissatisfaction of the workers is expressed, but then the trade union leaderships can agree to compromises and come to a conclusion of the collective bargaining round. So this is what is most likely going to happen in the public sector. But we are arguing, like many workers at the moment are doing, that no such compromise should be accepted, and that in case the employers do not give in to the demands of the trade union, that then a ballot should take place to organize an indefinite strike to actually win the full demands. And we would argue that this should happen. We are trying, as socialists within the trade unions, together with other workers, to bring together combative and critical trade union activists. In, for example, in the public sector union, we're organizing the Network for the Fighting and Democratic Public Sector Union, which is an attempt to start like a broad left opposition within the union.
Great, thanks, Sascha. Well, those are all the questions I had, so thanks for taking the time out to talk to us.
Thank you, and hope to see you again.
Yeah, see you soon.
If you're not yet a member of the Socialist Party and agree with the points raised today, then get in touch on our website www.socialistparty.org.uk to find out what being a member will mean for you. Our website's packed with more political analysis, and you can subscribe to our weekly paper, The Socialist, and our monthly magazine, Socialism Today, getting them delivered to your door or an e-subscription to your email. The Socialist Party has no big business backers. All of our work is funded by donations from individual supporters. And if you agree that we need an alternative to war, capitalism, and endless cuts for the poor, make a donation today.